car rolled slowly down the quiet streets of the suburban neighborhood, the tires crunching softly on the gravel driveways. The sun was just rising, casting a warm golden light on the neatly trimmed lawns and pastel-colored houses. She gripped the steering wheel with calm determination, her eyes scanning the rows of identical mailboxes, manicured shrubs, and flower beds bursting with color. There was a peace here she had not known for a long time, a stillness she had yearned for after years of moving from city to city, never quite finding a place where she felt she belonged. When she stepped out of the car, her arms immediately drew subtle attention. Faint scars ran along her forearms, pale against her skin, remnants of trials she rarely spoke of. She wore long sleeves, but the edges of a tattoo peeked from under the cuff of her right sleeve, a small hint of something personal she had carried with her through every chapter of her life. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder and began unloading boxes, her movements careful and deliberate, betraying a discipline few could notice. Across the street, a group of neighbors had gathered for their morning coffee. The Homeowners Association president, a tall woman with sharp features and an air of authority, narrowed her eyes as she noticed the new arrival. "That's our new neighbor," she whispered to the woman next to her, tilting her head toward. "She looks different. I wonder what her story is." Whispers spread quietly but quickly, the way gossip tends to do in a close-knit community. A couple of women leaned on their fences, pretending to water their flowers, but their eyes followed every move. Some of the men offered polite nods, trying not to stare, while children ran past, unaware of the silent scrutiny that accompanied every adult gesture. Noticed nothing outwardly. She moved with a steady grace, unloading boxes, carrying potted plants, and arranging them in neat rows along the porch. The mailbox at the edge of her new driveway was her first small task. She opened it, checking the welcome pamphlets from the Homeowners Association. A smile tugged at her lips as she read the neatly printed guidelines, the list of neighborhood rules, and the schedule for the next HOA meeting. She had dealt with strict associations before, rules that felt suffocating, but she was prepared. Had a quiet resilience, one that had been honed over years of challenges and judgments. A soft voice called out, "Hello there," looked up to see striding across the lawn, heels clicking against the pavement. She carried herself with the confidence of someone used to being in control, scanning as if evaluating her worth. Smiled politely, extending a hand. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice calm and steady, carrying neither fear nor arrogance. His eyes flicked to his arms, and for a brief moment, curiosity and judgment mingled in her gaze. She said, voice friendly but laced with subtle authority. "Welcome to our neighborhood. I see you've moved in all by yourself." Nodded, "Yes. I like to settle in quietly, learn the surroundings first. Thank you for the welcome." Her words were short, measured, but warm enough to disarm most initial suspicion. Tilted her head, studying her further. "I'm sure you'll find our community interesting." She gave a polite smile and left, leaving to her tasks. The brief encounter left a lingering tension, a sense that eyes would continue to follow her, silently judging, silently curious. As the morning light shifted and the shadows of the houses stretched across the street, arranged her plants and opened the boxes of household items she had brought. Everything had its place. Each movement was deliberate, a rhythm that spoke of order and control, qualities forged from experience. The tattoo under her sleeve, hidden yet present, was a quiet testament to the past she carried with her, a past she did not flaunt but did not hide either. By the time the sun reached its peak, neighbors had drifted back to their routines. The gossip subsided into the background, leaving in her garden, surrounded by flowers she carefully planted, each one a symbol of new beginnings. She paused for a moment, taking a deep breath of the warm air, the scent of fresh mulch and blooming flowers filling her senses. This was the start of something new, a chapter in a life defined not by what others thought of her, but by the quiet strength she had always carried. For now, she would remain silent, observing, learning, and waiting for the world to see her for more than the scars on her arms. And little did the neighborhood know, there was more to than anyone could imagine. Second morning in the neighborhood began quietly. The sun had barely touched the rooftops when she stepped outside, watering the flower beds she had arranged the day before. Each plant seemed to grow stronger under her care, a small reflection of the care she gave to every part of her life. She moved with a calm precision, adjusting the soil, pruning leaves, and checking the alignment of the pots. To the casual observer, she appeared ordinary, even delicate. Yet there was a quiet determination in every movement, an unspoken strength that hinted at stories no one could guess. Across the street, a few neighbors were already awake. They leaned against their fences or peeked through windows, eyes flicking toward. Their whispers carried over the morning breeze, soft but persistent. "Did you see her arms yesterday?" one woman murmured. "She has marks. I wonder what happened." Another shook her head, sipping her coffee. "She's so quiet, it's almost unnerving." Paid no attention, focused entirely on her garden. She had long learned that whispers were the background noise of life, especially in places like this, where everyone had an opinion and no one hesitated to share it. Her arms bore the evidence of past struggles, scars that told stories she did not owe anyone, but she did not flinch under the silent scrutiny. Instead, she continued her work, each careful movement a testament to self-respect and quiet dignity. By mid-morning, a few children ran past her yard, laughing and chasing one another, their innocent energy contrasting sharply with the subtle tension among the adults. One little girl stopped briefly, curious about the flowers, crouched down, smiling gently. "Do you like daisies?" she asked. The girl nodded, eyes wide, handed her a small, freshly cut bloom, and the girl ran back to her friends, clutching it tightly. The moment was fleeting, but it was one of small victories, proof that kindness could speak louder than gossip. Later appeared again, clipboard in hand, observing from the edge of the driveway. She was meticulous in her watch, checking that every plant was placed properly, that the walkway was clean, that the mailbox was perfectly aligned with the others. Posture was rigid, a mix of authority and judgment. "Good morning," she called, approaching briskly. "I see you've started planting. Very neat. Just make sure the flower beds don't extend beyond the HOA guidelines. We like uniformity here." Looked up, her expression calm. "Thank you for the reminder. I'll make sure everything stays within the boundaries." Her voice was soft, yet firm, leaving no room for argument or provocation. She returned to her watering, unfazed, her movements steady and deliberate. Lingered for a moment, eyes flicking over his arms, perhaps noticing the faint edges of the tattoo peeking from beneath her sleeve. She said nothing, only nodded curtly and walked away, leaving to her morning routine. The rest of the morning passed in quiet observation. Noted small details, neighbors' habits, the rhythm of cars on the street, the way children laughed and adults whispered. She was careful not to overstep, careful not to invite more judgment than necessary, but she also quietly made her presence known. There was an elegance in her restraint, a subtle statement that she was neither weak nor intimidated, no matter how many eyes were on her. By noon, some neighbors had gathered for their usual coffee break on the corner, casting glances toward as they discussed her quietly. "She's strange," one remarked. "So quiet, and those scars, it's unsettling." Another laughed softly. "Do you think she's hiding something?" Could hear none of it, yet each word landed in the world around her like a stone skipped across water. She remained untouched by their judgment, moving with the calm assurance of someone who had weathered storms far larger than gossip. As the sun climbed higher, paused, leaning lightly on her shovel, taking in the neighborhood she had chosen as her new home. The gardens were neat, the streets quiet, and yet under the surface, tension and curiosity swirled like an unseen current. She breathed deeply, savoring the warmth, and felt a faint flicker of hope. This neighborhood, with all its rules and quiet scrutiny, might not be perfect, but it could be a place where she finally belonged. And if it could not accept her immediately, she would remain herself, calm, composed, and unshakably strong. Little did the neighbors know, behind her quiet demeanor and gentle smile, carried a past that would soon command more respect than any rules or whispers ever could. The day of the Homeowners Association meeting arrived with a crisp morning breeze that carried the scent of freshly cut grass. Adjusted the sleeve of her blouse as she walked toward the small community hall at the end of the street. She carried a leather folder with notes and documents neatly organized inside. Her movements were calm, deliberate, as if every step had a purpose, every gesture measured. Inside, the hall was buzzing with conversation. Neighbors stood in small groups, exchanging pleasantries and quiet critiques of one another's yards, houses, and personal choices. As always, held court near the front of the room, clipboard in hand, her eyes scanning the crowd like a hawk. She smiled politely at some, offered nods to others, but her gaze lingered on longer than necessary. Chose a seat near the back, careful to observe without drawing undue attention. She noted the subtle dynamics, The way's voice carried authority, the quiet exchanges of gossip between neighbors, the occasional sympathetic glance from someone who seemed less judgmental. Her own hands rested neatly in her lap, revealing nothing of the tension that sometimes tightened her chest in rooms like this. The meeting began with the usual formalities: approval of previous minutes, budget discussions, and minor complaints about lawn care and parking. When finally addressed the community about new residents, her gaze fell squarely on. "And now," she said, her tone bright but edged with subtle scrutiny, "we have our member. Welcome to the neighborhood. Perhaps you can tell us a little about yourself." Straightened, her expression calm. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'm happy to be here. I've moved in recently and hope to contribute positively to the community." Her voice was quiet but confident, carrying a steadiness that drew a few approving glances. She did not volunteer unnecessary details, nor did she allow herself to be intimidated by the attention. Smile tightened slightly. "I'm sure we'll all enjoy your contributions, and of course, as part of our community, we all follow the HOA guidelines strictly." Her eyes flicked briefly towards arms, noting the scars peeking from under her sleeves. "I'm sure you'll understand the importance of maintaining appearances. It helps keep our neighborhood welcoming." A few neighbors exchanged quiet chuckles, nodded politely but said nothing. She had learned long ago that words were not always necessary. Composure often spoke louder than any defense could. She remained seated, hands folded neatly, letting her quiet presence convey a calm resilience that others could neither challenge nor dismiss. Tom sat in the corner, leaning slightly forward, his eyes catching the edge of tattoo beneath her sleeve. It was subtle, partially hidden, yet familiar enough to make him pause. He did not speak, but he studied her movements, the disciplined posture, the way she responded without hesitation, the quiet confidence in her gestures. To him, every detail suggested a history that went beyond casual gossip, beyond scars and superficial judgments. As the meeting continued, neighbors voiced minor complaints about paint colors, landscaping, and noise. Some whispered comments about her quiet demeanor and the marks on her arms. She listened without flinching, her calm eyes occasionally meeting theirs, neutral but unwavering. She did not argue, did not explain, and did not flinch. Her silence carried its own authority, a quiet assertion that her life and experiences were not for casual speculation. By the end of the meeting, attempted to regain control with a few pointed remarks, but remained unruffled, rising gracefully to leave. "Thank you for having me," she said quietly, nodding to the group. Her voice held no trace of resentment, only calm acknowledgement. As she walked out into the afternoon sun, Tom followed her with his eyes, making sure she noticed nothing. The tattoo on her arm, her scars, and her quiet demeanor told him enough. In that moment, he recognized the kind of strength that commands respect silently, strength forged in experiences that few in this neighborhood could imagine. He made a mental note to approach her later, knowing the revelation of her past would speak louder than any words could. Returned home that afternoon, tending to her garden with the same meticulous care as before. The whispers and glances of neighbors felt distant, almost irrelevant, compared to the quiet satisfaction of a life lived with integrity and composure. She knew the next days would bring more scrutiny, more judgment, but she was prepared. Little did the neighborhood know, the quiet woman they observed so casually carried a story that would soon demand attention, respect, and silence from even the most judgmental of neighbors. And Tom, the quiet observer in the back of the room, already sensed the significance of what lay beneath the calm exterior. The following week, the neighborhood seemed to pulse with a quiet tension whenever stepped outside. The sun was warm, the air calm, yet the subtle glances and whispered remarks trailed her like shadows. Neighbors began to notice her routine, the way she tended her flowers, watered the shrubs, and arranged her porch with care. Some admired her diligence, though few would admit it aloud. Most, however, focused on her scars and her quiet demeanor, treating her silence as an invitation to speculate. On a Saturday morning, a small gathering formed near the corner of the street, ostensibly for casual coffee and conversation. Moved gracefully along the walkway, tending to her garden while the neighbors sipped their drinks and whispered amongst themselves. "Have you seen her arms up close?" one woman asked softly, leaning closer to the other. "The marks, they're unusual. I can't help but wonder what happened." Another neighbor laughed quietly, tilting her head. "She doesn't say much, does she? That kind of quiet, it's strange. And those scars, well, I hope she's not dangerous." Their laughter was low, almost casual, but sharp enough to sting. Heard nothing directly, their words drifted into the background of her mourning, yet the intention behind them was clear. Chose not to respond. Years of experience had taught her that silence often carried more weight than argument. She knelt to trim a bush, her hands steady, her movements precise. Each snip of the shears reflected her calm discipline, an unspoken assertion that she would not be rattled by shallow judgments. Children ran past her yard, laughing and chasing one another, oblivious to the undercurrents around them. For them was simply a quiet figure among the colors of flowers and the warmth of the sun. Tom, meanwhile, observed from a shaded spot near the edge of the street. His veteran's instincts had not failed him. The way carried herself, the discipline in her posture, and the subtle movements of her hands all told him she was no ordinary newcomer. He noticed the edge of the tattoo peeking beneath her sleeve as she leaned to water a flower, and he felt a quiet acknowledgement stir within him. He knew its meaning even before the moment fully revealed itself. As the gathering continued, a few neighbors approached her more openly. One woman with a forced sweetness asked, "Do you mind telling us what happened to your arms?" Her smile was tight, her curiosity thinly veiled as judgment, looked up slowly, meeting the woman's gaze with calm eyes. "They tell a story of challenges I've faced," she said softly. "They are part of my past, and I carry them quietly." The woman's face tightened, unsure how to respond. Others around them exchanged awkward glances, realizing her answer left no room for ridicule. Returned to her gardening, calm and composed, as though the conversation had barely happened. Yet the ripple of unease spread among the neighbors, a small acknowledgement that their mockery had met its quiet match. Later that afternoon, another incident unfolded at the neighborhood park. Some neighbors had gathered for a casual picnic, and whispers followed as she walked past. Comments about her scars and quiet nature were exchanged more freely this time, a subtle escalation of the mockery. Moved through the park with steady steps, her eyes focused ahead, her expression serene. She helped an elderly man steady his bicycle, adjusting the chain with careful hands, and assisted a child who had tripped over a stone. No one in the crowd took notice of these acts, yet Tom observed each one, recognizing the discipline, kindness, and courage that underpinned her every movement. By evening, the neighborhood returned to its quiet rhythm. Porch lights glowed softly as she arranged her plants for the night. The whispers and glances of the day seemed insignificant compared to the quiet satisfaction she felt in tending her home. Tom, still observing from a distance, pieced together what the tattoo must mean, the discipline and resilience that carried silently with her. Little by little, the mockery had escalated, but its presence remained unshaken. She did not retaliate, did not complain, and did not bow to judgment. Instead, she let her actions and her calm demeanor speak for themselves. And unknown to most in the neighborhood, the story behind her scars and tattoo would soon demand recognition, commanding a respect no words or whispers could convey. Days settled into a quiet rhythm, each one filled with small but meaningful acts. She rose early, tending to her garden before the sun fully climbed into the sky. The flowers responded to her care, petals turning toward the warmth, leaves vibrant and strong. It was a small reflection of the life she carried within, a life marked by resilience, discipline, and a quiet determination that few in the neighborhood could see. The neighbors continued their whispers, their judgment now a constant backdrop to routines. Some whispered about her scars, speculating wildly. Others questioned her quiet demeanor, labeling it strange, almost suspicious, yet remained unbothered. She had long learned that judgment told more about the observer than the observed. Her focus was on small acts of care, subtle demonstrations of competence and kindness that spoke far louder than gossip ever could. One morning she noticed Mrs., an elderly neighbor struggling with grocery bags at the end of her driveway, approached silently, offering a gentle smile. "May I help you with those?" she asked. Mrs. hesitated for a moment, then nodded, lifted the heavier bags effortlessly, her movements careful and precise. She placed them inside the house, adjusting the boxes so nothing would spill or break. Mrs. eyes softened, a quiet admiration replacing the skepticism that had lingered in the neighborhood. Later that week, a small incident at the park drew attention. A young child had climbed a tree too high and could not get down. Panic had set in among nearby parents, their voices tense and urgent, approached calmly, assessing the situation with a practiced eye. "Step back a little," she instructed, her voice firm but soothing. She climbed carefully, reaching the child and securing them in her arms. She descended with precision, placing the child safely on the ground. Parents breathed a sigh of relief, and for a brief moment the crowd fell silent, watching her with a newfound respect they could not articulate. Tom, observing from a distance as he often did, recognized the signs immediately. The movements, the calm assessment under pressure, the quiet authority in her voice, it all spoke of a history forged in discipline and courage. He had seen these qualities before in moments of service where lives depended on composure, not noise. Every small act of kindness, every calm gesture, was a clue, gradually revealing the strength and experience behind her quiet demeanor. That evening returned home to her porch, her garden bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. She watered her plants with careful attention, checking each leaf for damage, adjusting the soil as needed. The tranquility of her home stood in stark contrast to the gossiping voices she could sometimes hear drifting over the fences. She was unaffected. Her peace came from knowing her own worth, from living a life guided by action rather than words. As she worked, Tom approached cautiously, maintaining a respectful distance. "You handle things very calmly," he said, his voice low and thoughtful, looked up at him, acknowledging his presence with a subtle nod. "It's just a way of life," she replied softly. He noticed the hint of a tattoo peeking from beneath her sleeve and the faint scars along her forearm. His expression shifted slightly, a mixture of recognition and quiet understanding. In that moment, a subtle connection formed between them, an unspoken recognition of experience and resilience. Tom did not speak further, knowing words were unnecessary. Returned to her routine, continuing to water and arrange her plants with meticulous care. The quiet of the evening wrapped around them both, a gentle acknowledgement that some stories were told not in words, but in the strength, precision, and courage behind each gesture. Across the neighborhood, whispers continued, but their effect was diminished. Some neighbors noticed the way interacted with others, the way she offered help without expectation or recognition. A few began to question their assumptions, though none spoke aloud. Little did they realize that the quiet woman they observed so casually carried a history that would soon demand their full attention and respect. Life, like her garden, thrived quietly, nurtured by care, resilience, and strength that did not need validation. She had faced judgment and adversity before, and she would face it here if necessary. But for now, she tended her small world, each act of kindness and courage a testament to the quiet power she carried within, a power that would not remain unnoticed for long. The following weekend brought a warm, sunny afternoon, perfect for a casual neighborhood gathering. Tables were set up in the small park near the center of the community, and the faint hum of chatter filled the air. Decided to join, carrying a small basket of snacks she had prepared herself. She moved with her usual quiet composure, weaving politely between neighbors, offering a nod here, a soft smile there. Children ran past, their laughter light and carefree, while adults gathered in clusters, sharing the small talk of suburban life. Some neighbors whispered about under their breath, their curiosity now tinged with mild suspicion. "She's so quiet," one said. "I wonder what her story really is." Another muttered, "Those marks, I still can't figure them out. Why wouldn't she just explain?" Ignored them, settling at the edge of the picnic area. She placed her basket on a blanket and knelt to arrange the snacks, careful to keep everything neat and inviting. As she leaned over, adjusting a plate of fruit, the sleeve of her blouse rode up slightly, revealing the tattoo on her forearm in full. It was intricate, detailed, and unmistakable, the insignia of a military unit, a mark that spoke of dedication, courage, and shared sacrifice. Tom, standing across the park, froze mid-step. Recognition struck him immediately. He had seen the symbol countless times during his own years of service. It was not just a design. It was a story, a declaration of honor, of trials faced and missions completed. He stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the tattoo, understanding flooding through him silently. The chatter of the crowd seemed to fade as he processed the revelation. For a moment, no one else seemed to notice. Adjusted the sleeve back over the tattoo, but the brief glimpse had been enough. Tom took a steadying breath, feeling the weight of history and courage behind that small, inked insignia. He did not speak immediately, knowing that this moment demanded respect and silence. Met his gaze and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod, a quiet acknowledgement that her story was understood. Some neighbors began to notice the shift in the atmosphere. Tom's posture, calm yet authoritative, drew attention. Whispers faltered as he approached, his eyes never leaving the tattoo. "That unit," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. His voice carried the weight of experience, a reverence that hushed the surrounding conversations. "I know that insignia, I know what it represents." Remained composed, her expression serene. She had anticipated this recognition from someone who could truly understand, someone whose experience mirrored her own in subtle ways. Her silence, long misunderstood as timid or aloof, now carried meaning. The tattoo was not just art, it was a testament, a symbol of her past and the quiet resilience she had carried with her into this neighborhood. Standing nearby, noticed the sudden shift. Tom's reverent gaze, his measured voice, and the subtle acknowledgement between him and left her momentarily speechless. She had spent weeks judging for her quiet demeanor and scars, but now she realized that there was a depth to the woman she had never considered. The previous mockery, the whispered assumptions, seemed hollow in the face of this revelation. The neighbors around them began to sense the gravity of the moment. Murmurs faded into silence, replaced by an unspoken respect. Adjusted her sleeve fully this time, letting the brief glimpse remain as the quiet symbol of a story no one had imagined. For the first time, the neighborhood saw her not as a quiet woman, but as someone whose experiences commanded recognition and deference. Tom finally spoke, his voice steady but soft. "That unit, it's more than a name. It's dedication, sacrifice, and honor. You've carried that with you." His words, simple but profound, carried across the park, leaving a weighty silence in their wake. The whispers of judgment had been replaced by acknowledgement. Nodded, allowing her presence and her history to speak for her. The small crowd around them absorbed the change, sensing that this quiet woman, long misunderstood, had a story far beyond their casual assumptions. And in that quiet, sunlit park, the balance shifted. Respect replaced ridicule, and the neighborhood began to see the truth behind the calm, composed figure who had quietly entered their lives. The park remained still for a moment longer, as if the sun itself had paused to witness what was unfolding. Tom's words hung in the air, a quiet declaration of respect that carried far more weight than any of the whispered gossip had ever managed. The neighbors, previously quick to judge scars and silence, felt a sudden shift within themselves. Their casual assumptions no longer seemed relevant or appropriate. Stood calmly, adjusting the sleeve of her blouse to reveal the tattoo once again, intentionally this time, letting the symbol speak for her. It was not a gesture of pride nor of provocation. It was simply a truth, one she had carried quietly for years, now acknowledged in the eyes of someone who understood. Her posture remained straight, her movements measured, radiating a quiet authority that did not require words. Tom approached her, careful not to crowd her space, his expression one of recognition and respect. "You've carried a lot," he said softly, voice steady. "Not many would understand what this means, but I do. I understand the discipline, the sacrifices, and the strength it takes to keep going." His words were deliberate, precise, filled with the kind of solemn acknowledgement that only someone who had shared similar experiences could offer. His lips curved slightly into a small, serene smile. "It's not something I need to explain," she replied, her tone even unflinching. "Those who are meant to understand will see it." Her eyes met his briefly, and in that moment a quiet connection passed between them, one forged not by conversation but by experience and shared recognition. The neighbors around them shifted uneasily. Who had spent weeks subtly critiquing found her mouth dry, her usual confidence faltering. She opened it to speak, but no words came. The previous air of judgment that had hung over the park seemed suddenly trivial, meaningless against the weight of what Tom had acknowledged. The realization settled over the group. His life, her scars, her tattoo, and her quiet demeanor were not marks of weakness. They were symbols of courage and endurance that demanded respect. A few neighbors stepped closer, curiosity and hesitation mingling in their movements. A young mother whispered softly, I didn't know." Another neighbor nodded, their expression thoughtful. Even those who had laughed or whispered behind fences felt a subtle shift within themselves. Had never sought approval or sympathy, yet the truth of her presence, made visible through Tom's recognition, demanded a new kind of acknowledgement. Returned her attention to the small group of children playing nearby. One of them had dropped a toy, and she bent down gracefully to hand it back. The gesture was simple, but it reinforced the quiet strength that had defined her throughout the neighborhood interactions. Strength born not from confrontation, but from presence, action, and integrity. Tom's eyes followed her, the weight of recognition still evident on his face. "You've earned this respect whether they know it or not," he said softly. Nodded again, her calm demeanor unchanged, yet a faint warmth crossed her expression. The connection, subtle as it was, carried reassurance and understanding, a silent acknowledgement that she was seen for who she truly was. Finally regaining her composure, spoke, her voice hesitant. "I think we may have underestimated you." It was not a critique nor a correction, merely an acknowledgement that reality had shifted. The neighborhood's perspective was slowly changing. The gossip and speculation had been replaced, at least partially, by reflection, understanding, and quiet respect. Did not respond with words. She simply continued her quiet presence, tending to her surroundings, interacting with neighbors and children alike, her actions conveying a dignity that words could not match. The scars and tattoo, once the focus of mockery and whispered assumptions, had become symbols of resilience and quiet authority. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the park, a sense of calm settled over the gathering. Remained herself, composed, gentle, and strong, while the neighbors absorbed the lesson that true strength often speaks silently, through action, experience, and integrity. The moment had passed, yet its impression lingered, a subtle but lasting transformation in the way the community viewed her. For the first time since she arrived, walked through the neighborhood without a whisper of judgment following her. Respect, quiet and earned, had taken its place. The week after the picnic felt different in the neighborhood. The same houses lined the streets, the same cars filled the driveways, and the same breeze rustled through the trees, but there was an unspoken shift in the air. Where once whispers had filled the silence, there was now a sense of watchfulness and respect. Neighbors who had previously stared at with suspicion or pity now met her gaze with quiet acknowledgement. They no longer tried to fill the air with needless speculation. Instead, they allowed their silence to become a gesture of respect. Continued with her life much as she always had. Each morning she watered her garden, trimming away leaves that had withered, coaxing flowers into bloom. The garden had always been a sanctuary for her, a place where patience and care revealed beauty over time. Now, however, it became something more. Neighbors began to notice the small bursts of color, the way tended her plants with diligence and gentleness. For some, it became a silent metaphor, a reflection of the way she lived her life, quietly, steadily, with results that spoke for themselves. One afternoon, while she was pruning the roses, Mrs. from across the street approached slowly, leaning on her cane. Her voice was soft but sincere. "I wanted to thank you for the help the other day. My son told me about your background." She hesitated for a moment, then continued. "You've lived through more than most of us ever will. I just want you to know I admire that." Smiled gently, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Thank you, Mrs. I don't expect admiration. I only try to live peacefully." Her voice was calm, but there was a warmth to it, a subtle kindness that made Mrs.'s eyes soften. The older woman nodded, understanding that strength was not meant to be displayed but to be lived. As the days passed, even the children began to look at differently. They no longer stared at her scars with curiosity or fear. Instead, they greeted her with cheerful waves when they passed her garden, sometimes running over to tell her about their day. Listened patiently, her calm presence a quiet comfort to them. To the children, she became less of a mystery and more of a steady figure, someone who was simply there, dependable and kind. Tom, meanwhile, found himself reflecting often on the moment at the park. He knew the significance of his tattoo, and he carried a deep respect for the experiences she had lived through. One evening, he stopped by her house not to pry or to ask questions, but simply to sit on her porch while she watered her plants. "You don't have to say anything," he told her. "I just feel it's good to be here." Glanced at him, offering a small nod. Words weren't necessary between them. The silence was enough, carrying a weight of mutual understanding. Who had once been his harshest critic began to shift as well. She started greeting with tentative smiles, no longer carrying the sharp edge of judgment in her tone. One morning, she even stopped to compliment his garden, her voice awkward but sincere. "Your flowers, they look beautiful," she said, thanked her politely, offering a simple smile. Walked away feeling humbled, realizing that true dignity had nothing to do with appearances or chatter. It came from resilience, patience, and grace. The neighborhood gradually changed, not through words, but through her presence. The gossip faded, replaced by quiet reflection. Some neighbors carried a sense of regret for how they had judged her too quickly, while others simply chose to learn from the shift in perspective. Never demanded an apology. She never asked for recognition. She lived as she always had, quietly, steadily, with a dignity that needed no defense. As autumn began to creep into the neighborhood, the air grew cooler, and its garden shifted into warm hues of red and gold. The seasons turned, as they always did, yet the impression she had left on her neighbors remained. Her scars no longer defined her in their eyes. The tattoo, revealed only briefly, had become a symbol of strength that demanded silent respect. In the end, remained the same quiet woman she had been when she first arrived. But to those around her, she had become more, an example of resilience, of dignity that spoke louder than gossip ever could. She never raised her voice, never sought attention, and yet her presence had left a lasting mark on the neighborhood. Her legacy was not in words spoken, but in the silence she carried with strength, the kind of silence that could not be mocked, because it was filled with truth. And as the neighbors watched her move through her days, they understood at last that sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones lived quietly, without the need for explanation. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next mystery on HOA Hunter Stories.